Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Education USA Fair today and this special webinar. Our expert, Lisa Morrison from Minnesota State Mankato University, will give you resources and recommendations how to fund your. So it's like master's and PhD.
Right.
And I'm passing floor to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Roshan. It's really awesome to be here. It's 6 a.m. in Minnesota and it's very early, but I know it's afternoon by all of you. So I hope you're wide awake and ready to hear some good info. Just a quick disclaimer. I have two cats that are going crazy right now, so they may jump across my screen. So if you see them, I apologize. They're very active this morning. But we'll go ahead, we'll jump right in. So we're gonna talk about funding your graduate degree because I know many of you would like to come to the US to do either your master's or your doctorate program. And so I'll have a few suggestions in this presentation and then some really practical tips for you as well. So I know that we're being recorded, so you can always watch this later. Otherwise, I do recommend taking some notes throughout as well. So, all right. So again, I'm Melissa Morrison. I am the assistant director at Minnesota State University Mankato. So I do a lot of our recruitment efforts and I work with students like you to help you get the information you need to come to campus. We also work very closely with our admissions department, and many universities, they have their admissions and international student services together. At Minnesota, we have it separate. So I do immigration advising mainly and admissions on the side. So I know a lot of information about immigration advising as well, if you need that. So today we're going to talk about a few things. So we're first going to start talking about your budget. So we're going to talk about creating a budget and what you need to start thinking about for money. After that, we're going to talk about types of funding for your program. Then we'll go on to how to find those opportunities and then applying for those funding opportunities, when to apply, and we'll end with some tips and tricks. So the first thing that I always like to tell students is when you're thinking about coming to the US, whether it's for undergraduate or graduate, you really need to know what your budget is. So start creating that budget of what you can afford. And so some really important questions to ask yourself is, what is the overall cost of your program? A lot of times as students, I know we think about, okay, what is the cost of tuition? Tuition is, of course, probably one of the largest expenses when you're thinking about coming to the US, but it's not the only expense. You're going to have to think about your housing costs, your groceries, your fees, your health insurance. In the US, health insurance is quite expensive, and so that is something that you want to plan for. And so all of these things add up and they will all be on your I-20 for when you apply to come to the US. And you'll have to be able to show funding for everything. We'll look at some of those expenses for Minnesota State here in a minute, and I'll show you what I mean by all of those expenses add up. Are you going to bring dependents to the US? So if you are married or if you have children that you plan to bring with you while you study, how are you going to support them? Those will all be things that you need to think about because most likely they will not be able to work when they're here. If you have children, you'll have childcare expenses, or they'll have to go to school and you'll have to think about those school expenses for the children. So how will you support them? And then also, the ability to support them will be reflected on your I-20. So you'll have to think about that. So you'll think about how much programs cost, how much it'll cost to support any dependents if you have them. And then the next thing you should do, of course, is think about what is the maximum out-of-pocket cost you can afford. So whether you get a full tuition scholarship or an assistantship, there are most likely still going to be expenses that you have to fund out of pocket. So how much can you afford? Maybe you're getting some help from family back home and they are able to help you with maybe $2,000 a year. Maybe you have some money saved up and then you can also put maybe $2,000 or $3,000 per year. But what is that maximum expense that you can afford if you don't have a job, if you don't get an assistantship? Those are really important things to ask yourself. So I just want to pull up our website here. Let me switch my screen so that you can see that. So at Minnesota State, we do have over 80 different graduate programs. We have 3 doctoral programs. We have a Doctorate of Education, an EDD program, and then a Psych D program. We actually have 2 different Psych D programs, psychology doctorates. But we mostly have master's programs. So please remember that when you're looking at these expenses. So we break it down by tuition and fees. So you can see that for 1 full year at Minnesota State, tuition is only about $9,000. So it's pretty affordable when you think about it. But that $9,000 is not the only expense that you have to think about when coming to our university. And this would be the same at any university, right? We say to estimate about $10,000 for housing. And that would be your groceries included as well. Of course, this cost is variable. Some of our students come and spend less. Some spend significantly more, depending on if they have a family and they need to rent a larger place. But $10,000 is quite a bit, and this is money that you will have to provide evidence that you have. Going on, not only is it housing that we have to have students think about, but books and supplies are very important. As a graduate student, you may be spending a little bit more depending on your program. Our students do spend $2,000 on health insurance every year. So that's a big expense that oftentimes students don't think about, but you will have to be able to provide funding for that. And then some personal expenses. So with all of these different expenses together, you know, we're asking that you can provide evidence of $22,995. So tuition is incredibly affordable, $9,000 for 2 semesters, right? Everything all together, though, starts to add up. So we have to think about, okay, what is that maximum we can put out? If we have dependents, you know, that's going to be more. At our university, if you bring 1 more dependent with you, we do say that you need to provide another $6,500 of funding. And then for every dependent after that, it's $4,000. So if you're bringing, you know, a significant other and 2 children, that's about $15,000 extra dollars that you are going to have to say that you can afford. So it's very important, like I said, to think about what is your budget and finding that place that you can hopefully get funding so that you can afford all of those different expenses. So now that we've talked about the not so fun part about budgets and creating your budget, understanding what you're really going to be paying for, let's talk about funding. So some of the most popular ways of funding your graduate degree, so the different types of funding methods are usually the big one is assistantships. So those are the main funding sources for graduate students. Depending on where you go, it may be easier or harder to get one of those. At Minnesota State Mankato, 25% of our students have some sort of assistantship that is funding their studies. But that would vary. My friend Yevi is here. She's working at the University of Tennessee, and that is a much larger institution. So, there are probably more opportunities, but I'm not sure. Maybe there are fewer students percentage-wise that get them. These are all really important questions to ask when you're looking at a place of study. So some of those different assistantships are graduate assistantships. At our university, a lot of times those assistantships look like a job. Like you are just another member of the staff at the university and you help out with different things. I have a communications graduate assistant that I oversee, and she helps me with social media and email campaigns. I also oversee 2 graduate assistants who help at our office as our front desk managers. And so they're doing customer service related work and helping organize our student workers to provide, immigration help to all of our students on campus. So those are just some different examples of what a graduate assistantship would look like. Again, oftentimes they're more like a job, like a student services position on campus. Then there's teaching assistantships. I think that kind of says everything about it, right? So you would teach in order to help fund your position in your program. Some teaching assistantships, you would be the main teacher of a class section. And so you would be in charge of planning all of your lessons, grading, all of that. Other positions with teaching, you may be taking more of a support role. So you'd maybe be helping more with grading, study sessions, or lab sections. It all depends on what type of university you're attending and then what faculty is your supervisor. So again, all great questions to ask. And then finally, we don't have this opportunity at my university because we are a teaching university, but if you're at a research institution, you could get a research assistantship. So that would be, again, my friend Yevi, she's here. She's from a research institution. This is probably a sort of position that you could apply for at her university. A research assistantship, your main task, again, would be helping out with your research, with faculty programs, either setting up research, developing research, however that is set up in your specific position. And then some students will come on a fellowship, so like a Fulbright fellowship. Some universities have specific fellowships for students. I know some of the countries that you all reside in have fellowships that you can come to the US and study on. And then some universities do have need-based assistantships. I will say that this is probably the least common of all of them. We do not have need-based assistantships at my university, but I know that some probably more private universities would have this opportunity. And then types of and sources of funding. Sometimes you may be working for the university as a whole. Sometimes you may be getting funding from a specific department. That's often very common if you're doing a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. And then, of course, grant. Many universities will get grants to help fund students to study. You might be writing grants when you come here to help fund your assistantships. And those are all really great learning opportunities for you to bring into the professional world. I saw a hand, but I think it's down now. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat over here. If it is relevant to what is on the slide, I will try and answer them right away. If it's something more general, I'll answer it at the end of the session, okay? So those are our types of funding opportunities. So now that you know what sort of opportunities there are, how do you go about finding them, right? Because that's the most important part. Like, great, these things exist, but how do I get one? Um, so finding those funding opportunities, it may depend a lot on where you end up going to pursue your education. But oftentimes these are some of the ways that you can find them. Some universities do have automatic consideration by your graduate program. So that means it may be part of your application when you're applying. You know, part of the application may be giving a sample of your writing or giving your resume so that they can look at where you might be a good fit. So that would be automatic consideration. And unfortunately, I don't know of any universities that have that, but there are some. Just because I don't know of them doesn't mean they don't exist. A lot of times you could apply directly through academic department applications. And so those departments oftentimes will have things posted during the application, like when you're applying for admission, or once you have been applied, you may want to reach out to them to see if they have any direct applications that they have. A lot of times academic departments are going to be a really good place for you to go and ask because they have the inside scoop, right? So even if they do not have a position in their department, you know, often we're all very well connected on our campus and we know like, oh, like we don't have one, but the math department has one. Or at our university, I often talk to our Women's Center, our Multicultural Center, our Career Center has graduate assistant positions, our Study Abroad office. So I'm very well connected and I often know who is hiring. And if I know something about your skills, I can try and give you like the tip of, okay, go to this place and include that you have talked to me and these are your skills, because that could help get you an interview. It's not gonna like guarantee that you get anything, but it could help you get an interview for the position. Contacting faculty from your department is a great way as well. So since master's students and doctoral students are so much more connected to faculty, I feel like when you come as an undergraduate student, you're still finding your place. At our university, you're applying as a university student. You're not applying to a program as an undergraduate student. As a graduate student, that is when you start applying specifically to programs. And I would hope that before you're applying for admission to a program, you're talking to those faculty members and making sure that that program has the faculty that you will have the best fit with. So as you're discussing admission with them, it's a great time to talk about, do you have any assistantships? Or if you don't have any assistantships, do you know of where I can apply? What are my chances of getting those assistantships? And if I get one, what are the benefits for me? Faculty and academic departments are really great. Don't be afraid to reach out to them and ask them. If they don't know, they'll say, I don't know. But most likely they'll know someone who can help you and they'll put you in touch with them. The next place is looking for universities that have research grants. You could look and see who may have the type of research you like, that you want to pursue, and do they have grants that would help fund your opportunities there. And then you could also look for general graduate assistant opportunities on university through student employment. And oftentimes at our university, the best way to find a position is actually doing the graduate assistant employment website. We have we have a website with jobs that are posted just like regular jobs for graduate assistants. My cat just hopped up here, so hi, Kitty. She's actually from Armenia. She's from not your part of the world, but very close to you all. So she looks like she's going to hang out with us for a little bit here. Okay, so I'm just looking at this one question here. Okay, so we're going to talk, Behzod, my cat is here. We're going to talk about some of your questions in a minute, actually. So I'm going to hang on to those and we'll talk about them and we can clarify a little bit later if we need to. As you can see, my cat is very friendly. So now applying for those opportunities, once you find them, then how do you at least get them, right? Because if you don't get them, then they're not much use to you. So when you're applying to these, you will have to apply with a resume. So you'll want to include any relevant experience and achievements. And my recommendation to you all is when you're putting in your resume to an American university, a US university, look at your resume through the eyes of a US professional. Oftentimes, resumes are very culturally based. And what is a really awesome resume in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, may not always be what we're looking for here in the US. Some of the standards there are things that we actually don't truly want to see on resumes here in the US. Oftentimes, we do not include photos on our resumes here in the US. We do not include marital status or nationality, anything like that. And I know sometimes that is very common in resumes in Central Asia. So my advice is to go on to any university that you're applying for an assistantship. Go to their career center website. Oftentimes it will be very easy. You can search Career Center and then look at the resources they have for resumes, because those are what they are showing as the best example of resumes. And so if you can replicate that or do something similar to that, it will be very helpful to get your foot in the door. It will show that you have an understanding of the US work environment. So that would be a really important thing. Even though I work in the International Center and I do always hire international students for graduate assistant positions, I do look at their understanding of a US resume style, because I think it is very important that they have that when they're doing my communication work. It just shows that level of understanding. The next thing, of course, when you're applying, you'll have to have a cover letter and or a statement of purpose. And these, of course, are two different things. A statement of purpose is often more information about your desire and what is leading you to the program. When I went to graduate school, I had to write a statement of purpose, not a cover letter. And of course, that statement of purpose talked about why I was pursuing that degree. And of course, still the benefits you can bring with you. But a cover letter is going to be more about what are your experiences that are going to make you the best fit for this position? What are the skills that you bring with you? And how are those going to help you in the position? So they are slightly different, the cover letter and the statement of purpose. And sometimes you'll only have to give a cover letter. sometimes only a statement of purpose, and sometimes both. So understanding the differences, especially if you have to provide both, is very important. Gathering your academic transcripts is really important. If you have gone to university to get your bachelor's degree abroad, it's really important to have those translated. You most likely will have to give a translated and perhaps even evaluated copy upon admission, to gain admission, I should say. So if you have copies, you could always include those in your application for an assistantship. If you don't, at least have a translated copy, because even though your evaluated transcripts will be on record, oftentimes a hiring authority will not have access to those. So you'll want to be able to give those right with your packet. Then you'll want to be able to do your test results. You'll want to show those test results, either GRE, GMAT, TOEFL, IELTS, whatever it may be that you need to show. You'll want to be able to also give a letter of recommendation. And so this is really important. And even if they don't ask for letters of recommendation upon applying, it is very important that you at least list some references on your application. It's always very important for me to be able to call and check up on, how does this person really work? Is what they said true? I mean, I don't actually ask that, but I often ask questions that a supervisor would be better at answering about your work than you yourself, only because when we're in an interview, of course, we usually only talk about the good, so I can get some of those honest answers out of references. So be sure to list references. And then with that information, list references that will most likely speak English. So I don't speak Russian or any of those languages. So I would need someone that I could speak to in English, and who of course is going to say only good things about you, right? So that would be the reference calls. And then you may have to do an interview. So it may be a virtual interview, it may be an in-person interview, depends on at what point you are actually applying for that position. So do be ready for an interview. And again, just like with resumes, go in and read the Career Center advice on interviewing so that you understand kind of that US style of interview. I interview students sometimes who want to come in and they give me all of this information. They talk for 15 minutes about all of these great things, but then that doesn't allow me time to ask the questions that I need to ask them and get those answers. So read through some tips on doing successful interviews in the US, and be sure that you are answering the questions and providing opportunities for the interviewer to come in and say things as well. So when do you apply? So once you have your application together, when do you apply? So deadlines and processes, they always will vary between universities. I can tell you ours, but it would be totally different than somewhere else. It just really depends. So wherever you decide to attend, be sure that you're looking at what are those deadlines, so that you're not missing deadlines. Because if you miss a deadline, most likely they are not going to be all that forgiving and extend it for you. Remember that you may have to apply during the admission process. So some universities may have you do it before you are even accepted. It may be part of the application, as we talked early on. Some places you may need to be admitted first before you start applying for assistantships. And that's how our university functions. You do need to have admission to the university before you can apply to any of our assistantships. We want to make sure, of course, that you will be at our university before we put in any time into interviewing or hiring you. So First, at our university, you apply, you get accepted, and then you begin applying for assistantships. And sometimes, because not everyone is guaranteed an assistantship, you may be applying as a current student before you're going through that whole process. My graduate assistant that I have right now, she was at the university for 1 year before I hired her. She had to do a year of self-funded study because we didn't have any positions open in our office, and she couldn't find another position that she was a good fit for. So she did have to fund 1 year. This year, she is with me and I fund her education plus a bit of a stipend. But it is very possible that you will have to come to the US and self-fund for a semester or a year, or potentially even longer. So it's really important to understand that that is a real possibility. With doctorate programs, I think it is quite, it's more usual that you will have a position upon acceptance. Like that's usually part of the application process. So you know if you'd be a teaching or a research assistant. But a lot of times with master's programs, it's not quite like that. And so there is a real possibility that you will have to self-fund for a bit. So again, that's why, thinking back to the first slide, we talked about what is your max out-of-pocket expense that you can afford? Because if you come and you can't find something until your second semester, you have to self-fund for a whole 6 months. All right, so some tips and tricks. So these hopefully will be good help for you, but faculty, like I said, are honestly your best resource. As a master's or a doctorate student, you should have excellent relationships with those faculty member anyway. So starting that before you arrive is awesome and is the best thing you can do. So start talking to them right away. You know, can I find an assistantship in this department? Can I be a teaching assistant? If not, like where else do you recommend that I look? Contact your references early so they have time to prepare and provide them with a job description. So I have been asked to be a reference multiple times, and sometimes students don't even tell me that they listed me as a reference. And so I get a cold call from an employer. That's fine. But especially if the student is someone that I worked with 4 or 5 years ago, it can take me a minute to remember. I mean, usually I remember the student if they've listed me as a reference, but it can take me a minute to remember what we worked on and some of the skills that they brought to a position or a project. And so contact your reference early so they're not stuck in that position like me. And, you know, tell them what it is you're applying for. So that's why I say here, provide your reference with a job description. That always helps me so much because then I can look at that job description and I can pull out things from that you most likely helped me with or showed that you have real skills in when we worked together. So those are going to be really helpful. References are often a big part of if you get a job or not, an assistantship or not. So help them out as much as you can. I brought this up a little bit earlier on, but provide references with your cover letter, resume, and personal statement. So they can use this information as a reference for their letters. You will be surprised at how busy some of your references are. I do try to write a specific letter or answer as many questions as I can in a phone call when I'm a reference check, but I get really busy and sometimes it's hard for me to sit down and write an amazing cover or reference letter for a student. And so if they give me their cover letter and resume, and then they've also provided me with that job description, it is so much easier for me to write an impactful reference letter for them. So, or when I'm on a call, it's so much easier for me to provide evidence of what they're asking me for. So really think about when you're giving your references, be sure that, you're helping them out to provide them the information and your potential new employer with all the information they need. And do this early on because, again, you want to give names when you're putting your application in. You don't ever want to have to wait for a potential employer to ask you for references. You want to give those names and contact information right away. When we're thinking about your cover letter, consider your cover letter as your interview on paper. So I get a lot of cover letters from student graduate assistants that say things like, I've always wanted to work in your office. You do such great things in your office. Here are some of the awesome things that I want to do once I graduate. And this sounds terrible, but I'm going to say it. I don't care. I don't care that you've always wanted to. Oh, I got to run and grab my charger quick. 1 second. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. The battery life on my laptop is not what it used to be. Okay, so I was telling you about what I don't care on resumes or cover letters, right? It's not that I don't care, but if you've wanted to work in my office the entire time you've been at the university, that's awesome, but it doesn't tell me what you can do. Tell me what you can do that is going to make you the best fit for this position. So discuss your academic, professional, and personal goals and how the assistantship will help you obtain these goals. So notice how this is different than just like, this is what I want to do when I graduate and I want to become this. Great. But how does that relate to this? Because if you want to become, I don't know, if you want to become a counselor after your program, then how is my graduate assistantship a good fit for you? Tell me how it's a good fit. Tell me the goals, like if it's a communication goal, then absolutely I'll see that there is a good fit and you're going to put effort into the position, but tell me those goals. And then more importantly, even is to discuss your relevant experience. So your academic, your professional, internships that you've had, volunteer, extracurricular. Some of the best cover letters I've ever read have said, in the past, I worked at a school and I had X, Y, and Z skills that will help me in this position because X, Y, and Z. So they've really lined up, like they've showed me their skills and they're telling me how it will help them in the position. To me, that's what I'm looking for as an employer. I know that not every employer is like that, but I will say that it is very common for anyone hiring a graduate assistant to be looking for someone who can, say those things, discuss those things in an intelligent manner. And then finally, ask your friends, family members, and references to read through your application materials. We can get so familiar with any essay that we write, statement that we write, that when we read it, we may miss some things. We may think things make sense when really they don't. We may not see that grammatical error that is actually really big. And if you're applying for a communications position, may make or break whether you get it. So, you know, even if your family maybe doesn't speak English, you can still run past the ideas with them. But, you know, ideally you'll have at least 2 other people read your documents to make sure that they make sense to them as well. And it's conveying the message that you hope to convey. So those are my most practical tips and tricks.